Hello, everybody. Welcome again, everyone. As I said before, my name is Steve Schnuck. I'm the director here at the Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies, formerly known as the Life Cycle Institute. We are an institute, we are an academic think tank with about 40 researchers. We're interested in public policy and issues of contemporary society that bear on questions of Catholic social teachings or that reflect the mission of the Catholic University of America. Thank you all for joining us. There are so many dignitaries, academic, political, so many Catholic leaders here this evening that unfortunately there is not time to acknowledge you all, but I know you all, and I appreciate that you're here. But allow me to notice two very good friends of the Institute who are here. Ambassador Thomas P. Milady, former American ambassador to the Holy See, and former ambassador, in fact, to several nations. Former president of Sacred Heart College and an alumnus of this university. And also his wife, Dr. Margaret Milady, the former president of the American University in Rome. This evening's dinner is our celebration of another year of work and success at the Institute. We're celebrating all the research that we've done, our many publications, books, and scholarly articles and such. We're celebrating the success of our many public and academic events, conferences, our lectures, meetings, and even our weekly brown bag colloquia. For those of you unacquainted with our work, I encourage you to take one of our brochures on the way out. They were on the table in the room before. If you're interested in joining our invitation list for events, we'd be delighted to include you. Tonight, though, we're also celebrating the lifetime work of one of our most prominent researchers, Dr. Dean Hoge, who died in 2008. Hoge's work as a sociologist of religion was the study of the changing character of contemporary religion and its intersection with social change. In particular, he was academically fascinated by Catholics, by what makes Catholics tick, by their institutions and their leadership, by the way the many dynamics of contemporary American society impact and intersect with American Catholics and their church. And yes, also by the way that today's Catholics are impacting America. Celebrating Dean and his extraordinary work, we are this evening inaugurating the first annual Hoge Memorial Lecture. And we are honored and pleased, and in fact genuinely humbled, that Dean Hoge's friend, Bishop Gerald Kikanis, will offer our first Hoge Memorial Lecture. Originally a Chicagoan, Bishop Kikanis became a priest for that archdiocese in 1967. Very early he became active in seminary education, serving as Dean of Formation, as principal, and serving as rector of what was the minor seminary, Quigley Seminary in Chicago, and ultimately rector of the prestigious Mundelein Seminary. He received his licentiate in sacred theology from Mundelein, a master's of education in guidance and counseling from Loyola University, and a doctorate in educational psychology. In addition to his seminary work, Bishop Kikanis was also a lecturer at Loyola University of Chicago, where he taught, and I'm tickled by the title, Community and Organization Development. Bishop Kikanis was ordained and appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Chicago in 1995 under Cardinal Bernardini. As a bishop, his pastoral interests have included vocations to the priesthood and religious life, permanent diaconate, and the encouragement of lay ministry. Pope John Paul II appointed Bishop Kikanis to be the 6th Bishop of Tucson in March of 2003. Bishop Kikanis is currently the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB. He is the former Secretary of that conference, a member of its Communications Committee, which he previously chaired, a member of the USCCB's Administrative Committee, a member of its Committee for Migration, former chair of the USCCB Subcommittee for Lay Ecclesial Ministry, formerly chair of the Diaconate Committee, and has been a member of many of the USCCB's most prominent committees, including laity, liturgy, priestly formation, doctrine, and the National Advisory Council. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the National Pastoral Life Center and is chair of the Board of Directors of the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, CARA. And we're pleased to have many CARA researchers here with us this evening. For the Institute, I thank Bishop Kikanis for his willingness to offer this first Hoge Memorial Lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Fathers, Excellencies, Professors, Bishop Gerald Kikanis.
Thank you very much. You know, when I was a new priest at St. Joseph's Parish in Libertyville, we had a youth retreat, and believe it or not, the groups were organized by birds. And one of the activities was each group had to come up and imitate their bird. So we'll start with the herons. That would be more fun than me with my lecture, I'm sure. First of all, let me express my profound gratitude to all of you present in this room. This is a beautiful group of people, deeply dedicated to the work of the church. Whether you're involved in research, whether you're involved in ministry, whether you're involved with the Bishops' Conference, wherever you are, you do so much for the good of the church. For that, I am deeply grateful, and I know that I speak for the bishops who are represented here by their various organizations to say thank you for your leadership. You know, we all miss Dean Hoge. His calm manner, his beautiful, delightful wit, his curiosity, his keen insights, his determination, his convictions, his sharp mind, his firm faith, all made an impression. We all miss Dean Hoge. His research, his studies, his writings, his lectures, a lifetime of contributions, now finished, now complete, left to us to continue. We all miss Dean Hoge, a Presbyterian layman, 49% Catholic, he would say, who immersed himself in the study of the Catholic Church and the Catholic priesthood. Shirley Josephine, his wife of 43 years, Christopher and Elizabeth, his two treasured children, miss him most. He belonged to family first. His memory will be continued now in the Hoge Memorial Lecture at the university he was so proud to represent, the Catholic University of America, and the Life Cycle Institute, now the Institute of Policy Research and Catholic Studies. Did I get that right, Steve? And I am really honored to give this inaugural lecture. You know, when Franciscan Sister Katerina Schuth received the Father Louis J. Luspatek Award from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, in recognition of her extensive research, she identified 4 fundamental qualities needed by anyone who wants to do research about the Catholic Church. This person, she said, must embody impeccable integrity, demonstrate considerable courage, have compassion and concern for those who feel the impact of the results of the research, and be grounded in faith and have love for the Church. This was certainly my experience of Dean Hoge. He reported what he found. He did not back down. He knew his findings were not always easy to hear, so he shared them carefully, respectfully, inviting dialogue, prodding gently. He wanted so badly for the faith to become alive, for the Church to be vibrant. Some disagreed with Dean's recommendations on how to bring new life and vitality to the Church and the priesthood. He and I had some very spirited conversations over areas where we didn't see eye to eye. Yet it is abundantly clear in the body of his work that he sought not to harm the Church or its priesthood, that he highly respected, having been in a seminary himself, but that he wanted so much to enliven them and to make them thrive. He was a sociologist of American religion par excellence, and the breadth and depth of his research provide a vast field for reflection. You know, it was in June of 2009 that Pope Benedict XVI declared a year for priests. And in his letter announcing this special year, he said that he wanted this year to be the occasion for priests to deepen their commitment to the renewal so that they might be even more effective exemplars of the gospel. He offered St. John Vianney as the model of good priesthood. Pope Benedict said he wanted the Church to uphold and thank priests for their selfless service. He called for priests to pray, to become one with Christ. He challenged priests not to be on their own and isolated, but to exercise their ministry in communion with other priests and with their bishops. And he encouraged priests to work collaboratively with the laity. Now, Dean Hoge would have much to say about how the Pope's hopes and desires for this year for priests could be realized. And indeed, his research can help give direction to how Benedict's expectations for a renewed and revitalized priesthood can happen. In this inaugural lecture, I will consider first the value of research in addressing pastoral issues, and then consider some aspects of Dean's research on the Catholic priesthood. Faith educators, pastors, bishops, even the Pope can learn much from careful research, as was clearly affirmed in the decree of the Second Vatican Council concerning the pastoral office of bishops in the Church. The decree noted the forms of the apostolate should be properly adapted to the needs of the present day with regard not only for man's spiritual and moral circumstances, but also for his social, demographic, and economic conditions. Religious and social research through offices of pastoral sociology contributes much to the efficacious and fruitful attainment of that goal. And it is highly recommended. End quote. Nevertheless, there are some who remain skeptical about research, especially when findings run counter to their opinions or what they believe needs to be done. Some question whether research can add anything to our efforts as a church to bring the gospel to life. Some disregard data at times, sometimes at great cost. Clearly, in our Catholic understanding, church doctrine is discerned or determined not by sociological methods, but by the magisterium in fidelity to Christ's teaching. However, research can help shape our pastoral responses, guide our efforts to enliven the faith, and point out ways to better form and support those called to serve. Too often, as we know, research efforts remain divorced from practice. What we learn sometimes fails to get applied in any effective way. This happens in educational research, in sociological studies, and in research on religion, and in most every area. What we learn too often never makes an impact on everyday life and practice. Francis X. Gannon, in his paper Bridging the Research Gap, Cara, Response to Vatican II, noted another reality that impedes our ability to apply what we learn from research. He wrote, "For too long, the researchers and the organizational churchmen have, on the surface of things, been at loggerheads, living seemingly in splendid isolation from each other. Such isolation has robbed the church at times of opportunities to understand issues and to address them in creative ways. Impressions, following one's instincts, hunches, and untested opinions can prevail over decision-making based on sound research. This can lead to tragic results. A few years ago, I was a member of a group of 50 or so leaders of faith communities and denominations who participated in the pulpit and pew study on religious leadership in the Christian churches that was directed by Dr. Jackson Carroll at Duke University and funded by the Lilly Foundation. Our task in this study, as practitioners and judicatory heads, was to reflect on the research being conducted, point out areas for further research, and draw implications from the research for our work in the diocese and organizations in which we serve. A wealth of valuable research, including much done by Dean Hoge, was available. The struggle, the greatest challenge,
The biggest disappointment was to find creative, innovative, effective ways to apply what was learned to daily practice in ways that would strengthen pastoral leadership. We read the reports, studied the findings, but we fell short in implementing pastoral responses to address what we learned. For example, one insight that grew out of those pulpit and pew studies of religious leadership that covered a wide range of religious denominations was that cultural factors affected what the leadership of those denominations experienced much more powerfully than did their own faith traditions. Yet we never identified concrete ways to address these prevailing cultural factors that were affecting our denominations and their leadership. Another example, in 2008, on Sister Mary Medina's initiative, CARA sought to bring together researchers, religious leaders, and practitioners in the area of Hispanic Latino Catholics. The goal was to bring the insights of research to how the Church served Hispanics. Such initiatives are most important if the living Church will benefit from the quality research that is available. However, this initiative, while well received, fell short of expectations in bringing research into concrete plans for change. There are areas in which the Church is turning successfully to research for insight and direction. Recently, the bishops have sought the assistance of researchers from the John Jay Center for Criminal Justice to study the nature and scope, causes, and context of the sexual abuse crisis that has so damaged the Church and the image of priesthood. Calling for and resourcing this research took courage on the part of the bishops and made clear the Church's desire to scientifically understand what happened and why it happened. As the reports have been coming forward, it is encouraging to see how bishops have moved from doubt and suspicion about the research to an eagerness to learn the results and what those findings can suggest for making the changes necessary to see that this will never happen again. Several years ago, Brother Bernard Stratman, then Executive Director of the National Catholic Education Association Seminary Division, gathered researchers to plan an event that would bring together researchers and church leaders to affirm the value of research, encourage a new generation of researchers to assist the work of the Church, and to emphasize the need to use research to enhance that practice. This important gathering has yet to happen, but I hope such an event might still take place that would highlight the importance of research for the Church and assure institutions like the Institute of Policy Research and Catholic Studies in CARA so necessary for the pastoral work of the Church. Research can lead to improved pastoral responses. Without research, pastoral responses may very well miss the mark or fail to make a meaningful difference. The Old Testament is replete with prophets who were oftentimes ignored, shunned, disregarded, sometimes with dire results. I wonder sometimes if that might be the lot of researchers who seek to assess what is in order that we might better understand what now needs to be done. Building on research can be like building your house on rock. Let me reflect on Hoge's research on the Catholic priesthood and its implications for Benedict's year for priests. I will consider 3 areas important in living priesthood faithfully and with joy, reflected in Dean Hoge's research. Those areas are beginning well in ministry. Second, the importance of spirituality, affirmation, belonging, and collaboration. And finally, the effect of generational differences in building fraternity in presbyteries. I will summarize Dean's research on each of these 3 areas, draw implications for applying that research to the life and ministry of priests, and pose additional research questions that might be explored further in each of these 3 areas. Beginning well in ministry. You know, the first years of any relationship, for our married couples, they understand that, for a business partnership, a vocation to a life of service in the church, the first years of any relationship are critical. The early years portend what will come. In Dean Hoge's 1999 review of research done over a 9-year period for the National Organization for Continuing Education, a number of stress points for those going into ministry were identified. The first and main stressors were overwork and over-responsibility. Many recently ordained felt overwhelmed. The recently ordained said that they felt under-supervised. They lacked abilities in the areas of administration, management, finances, staff relationships, running meetings, and dealing with conflict. Hence, they felt frustrated, unequipped to do what was expected of them. If our recently ordained will thrive in ministry as Pope Benedict desires, Hoge's research suggests that dioceses need to attend to the amount of work put upon priests and to find ways to assist them in acquiring the skills necessary to feel confident in what they are called to do in parish work. 2 years ago, our diocese in Tucson, on the initiative of our Vicar General, who is, as he says, a young priest in an old body, a second career priest, and former corporate executive, instituted a 2-year program to train recently ordained in management and administrative skills. I was terribly hesitant about how well it would be received by the newer priests. I feared they might feel like they were back in the seminary. But really, they embraced the program wholeheartedly. They expressed a great deal of satisfaction about the program's adult learning models, and they indicated what they were learning in the program was helping them to address real issues that they were facing in their parishes. My conclusion about this experience is that dioceses ought to implement such programs which not only provide priests beginning in ministry with needed skills for success in parish ministry, but also with skills that assist them in time management and how to make use of others' skills in order to free them from unnecessary demands. I think it would be helpful if we could further research how priests spend their time. What percentage of their time is spent in prayer, in ministry, in study, and in recreation? What leaves them with a sense of being overwhelmed? How does the capacity for work among priests differ from other professionals? Further research might identify ways that priests can be freed up from some administrative responsibilities so that they could devote more time to their pastoral work, which they find much more satisfying. Dean Hoge's research further showed us that the recently ordained priests often do not like their living arrangements. They are usually living with the pastor, and that can present challenges. Bishops would be well advised to discuss with their recently ordained priests their living situations and be willing to explore with them alternative ways for priests to find the fraternity and support they crave. Many priests in my diocese live alone, and some of those have been priests for a relatively short time, 2 or 3 years. This presents big problems, especially for the recently ordained, who have been living in a communal situation in the seminary where their friends were living just down the hall from them, where they had peers to pray with, and where they could talk personally about their lives. A bishop who is willing to start this conversation about living situations and who listens to his priests communicate their interest and his interest in their well-being and happiness will be much beneficial. Priests are left alone in their struggles and frustrations far too often. Priests need to be listened to. They need people with whom they can share their frustrations and discouragements, as well as their successes and achievements. They need to know that the one listening is willing to make necessary changes where possible. Further research in this area might clarify whether priests feel heard and understood by their bishop and those in responsible diocesan positions. It would be helpful to identify the different preferences priests have for communal living and how those preferences could be honored. Let me reflect a little on the relationship with the diocese and the bishop. A third area raised in Dean Hoge's study of the concerns of recently ordained was unhappiness with diocesan structures. They did not feel they mattered, that their input was sought. St. Benedict, of course, made a point of including the youngest in the community, seeking his counsel and advice. Benedict's insight could benefit bishops seeking to enhance the first years of ministry for their priests. Seeking the advice, the counsel, the suggestions of the recently ordained bring them into a closer relationship with the bishop and the diocese. People respond when their ideas are sought. I experienced that in my quarterly meetings with the recently ordained priests in our diocese. At first, it was like pulling teeth. There was little trust among them. They wondered what they could say with the bishop present. Conversation was at a very superficial level. Over time, and after repeated efforts to seek their advice and counsel, and to encourage their sharing meaningfully with one another, the group began to converse at a deeper level. I sense now that they look forward to this time to review their lives with their peers. Further research in this area might identify ways that diocesan structures might give priests a better sense that they matter, and how their counsel and advice could be sought out. Research might identify factors in the reluctance of priests to share at deeper personal levels with one another. Sexuality and celibacy. Dean Hoge's research on the first 5 years of the priesthood showed that there needs to be more openness about sexuality and more preparation about how to live a celibate life. Priests suggested that seminaries need more open discussion of sexuality in general and about topics such as the ability to live a celibate commitment and sexual orientation in particular. I saw great changes in this area during my years as rector at the University of St. Mary of the Lake in Mundelein. From the initial interview with candidates for the seminary, through their formation program, seminarians today are invited and encouraged to talk about their sexual orientation, their sexual history, how they could live a celibate life faithfully and in a fulfilling way. When I was a seminarian way back in the 60s, this sharing simply did not happen. Except in an occasional talk that many tuned out, or during spiritual direction, there was little reflection on living a celibate life. I believe this present greater openness has been very beneficial. However, after ordination, a priest rarely has an occasion for such sharing. Jesu Caritas groups and other support groups are still practiced by some priests, but even these groups rarely get to a deep level of sharing. I remember one such group in the Archdiocese of Chicago in which priests had been meeting for many years together. They were shocked when one of their group left to get married. He had never shared his struggle with them. They were shocked when they learned that another member of the group had left the priesthood to be in a homosexual relationship. Despite their years of praying and sharing together, there had never been the opportunity to talk about their sexuality and their struggles to live a celibate commitment. Sadly, as you might expect, this group lost cohesion and fell apart. Priests, for the most part, are not comfortable sharing with one another in the areas of sexuality and celibacy. But it is critical for them to talk and to share. Presbyterates need to encourage opportunities for priests to share at deeper levels with one another. Left alone, living alone, can lead to difficulties for many priests. Further research in this area might help further identify the most critical struggles priests have in living out a celibate commitment faithfully and with joy. What assists priests in living out that commitment? What are ways that priests can share their struggles at a deeper level? Prayer and spirituality. I thought it was striking in the pulpit and pew studies how seldom the denominational leaders talk about prayer and their spiritual lives. Prayer life and spirituality did not come up in the research interviews unless they were explicitly asked about these areas. Hoge studies, too, find priests struggling with maintaining their prayer lives after ordination. One would think that prayer and spiritual growth would be the primary concerns of religious leaders. Yet too often after ordination, priests do not keep up the spiritual disciplines and prayer life they had structured for them in the seminary. They often do not continue in spiritual direction and do not seek times for prayer. In holding up the example of the Curia of Ars, Pope Benedict reminds priests of the importance of maintaining a prayer life and deepening one's relationship with Christ. Benedict quotes St. John Vianney, "The great misfortune for us parish priests is that our souls grow tepid." As priests pastor their people, priests need themselves to be pastored. Dioceses need to create opportunities for priests to come together for prayer, to give priests access to spiritual direction, and need to encourage priests to seek prayer and spiritual direction as priorities in their lives. Further research in this area might clarify the spiritual practices used by priests. It might identify factors that make it difficult for priests to follow a rich prayer life. Do priests continue praying the liturgy of the hour? Do they practice devotions? Do they meditate? Do they practice Lectio Divina? do they ever see a spiritual director. Secondly, the importance of affirmation, belonging, and collaboration. Pope Benedict hopes the Year for Priests will provide the occasion to affirm the work of priests. He hopes it will be an opportunity for them to experience that they do their ministry not alone, but in communion with other priests and in collaboration with the lay. Hoge's research suggests these are critical needs. Affirmation. Priests are under-affirmed and under-rewarded for the good work they do. I have given talks to a wide range of presbyteries. I talk to priests on retreats and convocations. I listen to priests from many different dioceses, and this is what I hear them voice again and again. No one seems to care what I do. I get corrected, but rarely affirmed. I never hear from the bishop unless I'm in trouble. I have been a priest 45 years and have never heard from the diocese or bishop that any of it made any difference. I sense that feeling of a lack of affirmation when I sit with pastors who are finishing a 6-year term to review their service. Some men have been moved to tears, literally, hearing the appreciation people in their parish feel for them. As I read them their parishioners' letters, they listen attentively and seem to be hearing this appreciation for the very first time. They begin to realize that their ministry does indeed matter. When I call a priest just to say thanks for what he's doing, or write him a note affirming something he has done, the immediate feedback I get is that my recognition and acknowledgement mean a great deal. I write a Monday memo that is sent across the diocese as a way to highlight the good things happening in our parishes and the good things that our priests and laity and deacons and religious are doing. Such affirmation goes a long way. One priest has told me how shocked he was when he received a Christmas card from his bishop that included a $50 bill. This priest must have told me about this 10 times. I was not the bishop, just a friend, and he wanted to tell and tell and tell. Little gestures, especially unexpected ones, can go a terribly long way in communicating to someone that their day-to-day service does indeed make a difference. Dioceses and bishops would be well advised, as is suggested by Hoge's studies, to explore ways to affirm and support the work of priests. Yes, we have the title Monsignor, which is conferred on some priests, but that is clearly not enough. Research could identify what affirms priests and identify creative, unexpected ways that peers and the bishop and people can satisfy a priest's legitimate need for affirmation. Research could help identify what variables make different kinds of affirmations effective for different priests. Belonging. Too many priests go it alone. I do not know how this came about or why, but it is a phenomenon in every diocese. These priests rarely come to presbyteral gatherings. They find them painful. They do not rejoice in other priests' successes, and may even be envious. Clerical envy robs priests of sharing in the success of other priests. Pope Benedict says in his opening statement for the Year for Priests, echoing Pope John Paul II's apostolic exhortation, Pastores Dabo Vobis, quote, the ordained ministry has a radical communitarian form and can be exercised only in the communion of priests with their bishop. This communion between priests and their bishop needs to be translated into various concrete expressions of an effective and affective priestly fraternity. Hoge found that 60% of diocesan priests agreed strongly, or somewhat strongly, that closeness among priests was simply lacking. This closeness gap is not easily bridged, but presbyterates should be encouraged to see their work as a communitarian effort. Diocesan pastoral planning can assist at a sense of common mission. This can also be helped by priests praying together, working together, learning together, and laughing together. We have a monthly day of prayer for priests so that they can step away from the busyness of their lives to join their brothers in prayer. Bishops might encourage several priests to work together on a particular pastoral issue, such that we can reach out to those, for example, reaching out to those who have left the church. I saw a good example of this a few years ago when Bishop Joseph Pepe of the Diocese of Las Vegas and a number of his priests came to our diocese in Tucson to learn about the phenomenon of immigration from Mexico. Clearly, opportunities for priests to work together on pastoral challenges, to learn together about pastoral challenges, to enjoy one another's company, can build bonds. Further research could identify factors that foster a sense of belonging among priests. What factors in formation foster and hinder that sense of belonging? And how can priests grow in their appreciation and valuing of serving in communion with other priests and their bishop? Collaboration. While we cannot be a Catholic Church without priests, priests are but a small part of the Catholic community. Effective pastors find ways to draw upon the gifts and talents of the laity. We see in the Hoge-Wenger study that most priests see the need to move faster in empowering the laypersons in ministry. Yet there are still some priests, including some among the recently ordained, who feel a greater emphasis on lay ministry will diminish interest in ordained ministry or set up a clerical class within the laity. Quoting from the Second Vatican Council, Pope Benedict emphasizes collaboration with laity in his opening statement for the year for priests. He says that priests ought, quotes, to be sincere in their appreciation and promotion of the dignity of the laity and of the special role they have to play in the Church's mission. They should be willing to listen to lay people, give consideration to their wishes, and acknowledge their experience and competence in the different fields of human activity, close quotes. Hoge's research reinforces the need for presbyterates and bishops to discuss and develop ways of involving the laity in the work of the Church. While clearly the primary role of the laity is in the marketplace, bringing the gospel values to the biting issues of the day, laity also need to bring their talents to the work of the Church and be encouraged to do so. Research into how priests and laity collaborate would be helpful. What fosters and hinders such collaboration? What attitudes do lay ecclesial ministers have towards priests and vice versa? How can attitudes of distrust or hostility be addressed effectively? And finally, let me reflect on the effect of generational differences. Dean Hoge suggests that in some instances, presbyterates are not a family united, but a house divided. Priests differ in how they understand their ministry and the priorities they place on what they do. Generational and ideological differences sometimes set the young against the old. I had an experience of this some years ago when I was an auxiliary bishop in Chicago, and Cardinal George had asked me to coordinate an ongoing formation experience for recently ordained. We met several times a year for the first 5 years of their priesthood. As we began to meet, it became obvious that many of these recently ordained were having trouble with their pastors. That is not new, of course. I remember the many rows I had with my first pastor after my ordination in 1967. I learned only later how much I valued his priesthood. Although we were very different in temperament, we came to respect and value one another. The recently ordained group I was working with decided to ask their pastors to join us for one of our meetings. We divided into two groups, the pastors and the recently ordained. Each group was to come up with 10 adjectives that would describe themselves, 10 adjectives that would describe the other group, and 10 adjectives that they thought the other group would use to describe them. It was a very interesting meeting. The recently ordained saw their pastors as rebels, disobedient, disrespectful, focused on peace and justice issues, activists, liberals. The pastors saw their associates as conservatives, rigid, obedient, out of touch, aloof, focused on prayer, focused on self. Needless to say, a heated discussion followed. At one point, the youngest in the group, who was wearing his collar, got up and said, "You pastors went into priesthood when everyone applauded you, thought your decision was great. When I said I was interested in the priesthood, my friends laughed. My parents questioned me. I wear my collar because I've decided to be a priest. I need to know that this life has value and purpose and is not a waste of my life." It is important and beneficial, I believe, to find ways for priests of different generations to engage one another, to come to realize that despite their differences, there is a priestly heart and a pastoral concern driving their ministry. Hoge's studies show that many recently ordained do have a different emphasis in their understanding of priesthood. He described it as cultic versus servant leader. This different emphasis is expressed in their understanding of ecclesiology, the theology of priesthood, and liturgy. These generational differences are real, they're important, and not to be ignored. Yet through dialogue and engagement in presbyterates, these real generational differences can be less divisive to the extent that priests of different generations come to see that each have a love for their ministry and the people they serve. They each have a love for the church and for their vocation. They each find special fulfillment in their sacramental celebrations and in their preaching. They each feel the need for prayer and a closer relationship with the Lord. The church changes as she remains the same. Today it seems we feel even more strikingly the polarity of the household of faith. That is true to some extent in the priesthood as well. Hoge found evidence of this polarity in his research, and the reality of this polarity should encourage bishops to find ways to bring these different generations to engage one another, to break down some of the stereotypes and come to see the common love and commitment that I believe is present beneath the generational differences. Dean Hoge came to visit us in Arizona in April of 2008 as the keynote speaker for our annual Priests Convocation to share with us an overview of his research on priesthood. Dean, as you know, had just gone through heart surgery, yet he came. He had promised me he would come, and he always kept his promises. Dean was not feeling well and hardly ate anything for the 2 days he was with us. He just didn't feel right, he said. But he gave his talks with passion and humor, as was his wont. And he responded to endless questions, some of which were not very comfortable. He stayed up late talking about and discussing the implications of his research with individual priests and in small groups. He seemed tireless, although weary. He was able to spend a little time with me, and he shared with me some of his hopes for future research. And as the good researcher he was, he asked me what I thought. What about this direction? What's your thoughts? He clearly had his sights on carrying on further research, especially research about Catholic priests. It was only after getting back home that Dean found out he had stomach cancer that ultimately ended his work by taking his life. The legacy of Dean Hoge's research for our church is his identification of critical areas for the church and her bishops, priests, and people to consider, but most especially to act upon. It has been my honor and joy to share brief reflections on some of these critical areas with you. The body of his research is far too vast to give benefit to it in this short time. Dean's greatest joy, however, I believe, would be if some of his research found its way into the life of the church, resulting in a holier, more vibrant, more fulfilled corps of priests, and a greater number of men inspired by the priests they seek to seek a life of service to the church and to people as priests. We all miss Dean Hoge, and rightly so.
It's not much. Well, no, it's actually quite a bit. In my hand is Dean Hoge's last book that has just in this most recent week come out. And the title, appropriately, is A New Generation of Pastoral Leaders. And I present it to you, Bishop. Thank you. One of the things that Bishop Kikanis mentioned in his talk sounded a lot like a charge, both to the Institute and maybe to Kara as well. And that is, he mentioned Dean, and he mentioned Dean's very good friend, Brother Bernie Stratton, both of whom had been pushing me and probably pushing Sister Mary Mendina and others here in this room as well, to organize some kind of a conference on the future of church research, Catholic church research. Brother Bertie wasn't able to be here with us tonight. You see Kathy Schmidt, his longtime assistant, is with us. He's having some health difficulties too. But I think, and I think Karis would go along with me on this, we're ready to take up that charge with Bishop Kikanis to hold that conference and to consider the future of churches. Thank you all very much for attending this evening's celebration. It's just been wonderful to see you all. I hope to see you all again next year. The official event is over at this time. Feel free to nibble away at your desserts and talk with your friends. But again, thank you very much for one day.